Tonight we're going to talk about how to select trees and healthy plants from nurseries and just some of the other kind of need to know information about trees, which are one of the more expensive pieces of plant material that we use in design work. So we're going to talk about the value of trees in the landscape, tree forms, tree trunk types, the cost of trees, how to select a healthy tree, how to plant a tree, different types of tree stakes, and showing you the process of a field-grown tree and how that might be harvested and relocated to a project site. So trees are important to our environment. They improve air quality so that we can breathe cleaner air. Trees collect carbon dioxide and store it in a process called carbon sequestration. That's really important to offset global warming. And so when we have plantings, especially younger plantings of trees where they're amassing a lot of woody material, that's our kind of peak carbon sequestration. So that helps us keep our planet cooler. Trees utilize carbon dioxide during the process of photosynthesis and convert it into oxygen and then store the rest as the woody material. So trees can help us use less energy. So if we have a well-placed tree, it can shade the house and reduce our energy used to keep our houses cool, especially if you're using a deciduous tree where it's leafed out in summer, so it's providing some shade to the house, but in then winter the leaves drop off, and so the sunlight then can penetrate to the house and warm it up. Trees can reduce water pollution. So a lot of trees are used in a process called phytoremediation, and these trees have some adaptations that allows them to either bind up contaminants like heavy metals in their root systems, or some trees actually use excess nitrogen and convert it into something harmless and off-gas it into the environment without causing kind of global warming impacts. So they can be used to reduce pollution in certain situations. And they keep our cities cooler. So trees reduce the heat island effect in urban areas by shading concrete, asphalt, and other surfaces. And they also keep it cool through this process of transpiration. And that means that they are pulling up water from the ground and evaporating it out of their leaves, and that is kind of creating more moisture and keeping our urban areas cooler. So here's an urban forest in Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon is considered a tree city. That is a very important component of their cityscape, and there's lots of emphasis on planting new trees, and I'm sure it has a lot of help in keeping their city cooler. So trees, when they've done studies, trees increase the value of homes and businesses. A large front yard tree, I'm going to say a well-placed large front yard tree, is estimated to add 1% to a house's sales price. So that's a pretty good deal. And large specimen trees can add 10% to the property value. So maybe you have like a heritage oak in the backyard. That would add a lot of value to your property. When I was studying design, the conventional thinking was you don't put trees in shopping areas because you don't want to block the storefront windows. But that has changed, and you see that a lot in these lifestyle centers like we have at Otay Ranch. Also, this image is from the Grove Shopping Center in Los Angeles, very, very popular newer shopping area where you see a multitude of trees. And what they found is that when people are in an environment like this with trees and shade and benches and more of a park-like setting, that they'll actually spend more time and spend more money in that shopping area. So that conventional design wisdom has kind of changed in the recent years. So trees help people get along and make us feel better. So tree planting programs give inner city neighborhoods a stronger sense of community and help to alleviate some of the stresses of inner city living. And they've done studies where hospital patients with window views of trees can recover significantly faster and with fewer complications than patients who can't see trees. Trees provide valuable food and shelter. So in many areas in Southern California, we almost have this urban desert where there are very, very few trees or green places for animals to get a little bit of a reprieve. And this is really important because we are located along the Pacific Flyway. We're a huge migration corridor from the northern regions down into Mexico. So having spots with trees that allows these birds to take a rest before they continue their migration is really important. And even dead and dying trees, which we would call snags in restoration, can provide some valuable shelter for birds. Bigger is better. Large, healthy trees remove 60 to 70 times more pollution than small trees. Coarse textured or hairy leaves do a good job of trapping tiny pollution particles. Long-lived shade trees provide the most benefits over time. We have lots of different forms of trees, and we'll be studying these in a little bit more depth, probably in a week or two when we work on our section and elevations. And you'll get a copy of this actual handout. But you can see some trees have a very pyramidal form, some have a very round form, some have a very picturesque form. So these are all things we keep in mind when we're designing. And then we have different types of trunks for trees. So as a specifier, when we call out a tree on our plans, we also want to call out the trunk type. So if no trunk type is given, we assume it's a standard trunk. And that's your basic kind of idea of a tree where it's got one single trunk with the head of leaves on top of it. But you can also order multi-trunk trees for some species. What's currently shown there is a crepe myrtle, but also if you think about olive trees, a lot of times they come as a multi-trunk tree. And we also have trees that are full to ground. And what that means is that their trunk has branches all the way down to the ground. So it's a single trunk, but it has these little branchlets that come off of it. And they are maintained that way, throughout the life of the tree. And we use these a lot for like screening in large properties where we want to create a hedgerow. Palms are popular in our region, so they can also come as multi-trunk or single trunk palms. Sometimes they're mistakenly called out by height as brown trunk height. That's not totally accurate. The more accurate term is trunk height without the brown. And that's because when we measure a palm height, we measure from the ground to the base of the fountain of new growth at the top of the tree. So that's not always entirely brown. So it can create confusion if we call it a brown trunk height. Trees are costly elements to the landscape. So it's important that as designers we're thoughtful about where we put our trees and that we plan for the mature size of the tree and make sure it's being adequately irrigated to protect the investment. So a 15-gallon tree might cost $150. All of these include kind of shipping it to the site and installing it with bubblers or some form of irrigation professionally installed. So you can see as the tree size goes up, the price goes up pretty quickly. So 24-inch box might be $350 a tree, 36-inch box might be $680 a tree, and goes up and up depending on the box size that you choose. So for palms, those are priced by their height. So Canary Island palms have historically been very popular and very expensive. They do not really grow these in nurseries. Normally, if you get a 25-foot Canary Island palm, that tree is probably pushing 50 years old. So they go around to people's houses, knock on their doors, ask if they're willing to sell their trees, and they harvest them and prune them up and resell them to the landscape industry. So the expense on that is about $1,000 a foot. I will also say Canary Island and date palms have some current pest problems, and they are dying off in South County. So it's not a very wise investment right now. It never has been, but some clients want them very much. I've certainly had clients like that. But there is a big pest problem, and that they're losing a lot of the Canary Island palms in kind of the Imperial Beach area. And I'm sure that will spread. It's an invasive pest that is bothering that tree. Traditional date palms are pretty inexpensive for what you get, and that's because they are raised as a food crop out in the desert. So I've had clients decide they want date palms on their project, and I've been paid to go out to Indio to the date palm fields and tag the trees for use on our projects. Mexican fan palms are very inexpensive and also very invasive. So they have really fallen out of favor because they do reseed so readily and they threaten our natural ecosystems. So here's a quick overview of how to select a healthy tree. We'll go through these slides really quickly. We want to examine the roots, and we want to make sure that our roots aren't root bound in the container. Because if we select a tree that has circling roots like this and we plant it, those roots aren't going to fix themselves without corrective pruning. So you can see that large tree has the circling roots, and it will eventually girdle the tree and kill it. And then now you have a big dead tree that's going to be expensive to remove. In the middle picture, that is encircling roots, and that can be corrected. You would have to very kind of carefully untangle the roots and kind of prune the roots and take care with planting that plant, make sure it's staying moist. But if you corrected it, then that might turn into a healthy tree. And then the picture on the right is actually underdeveloped roots. So those trees, we actually had to do a tree autopsy on because they kept dying. And what we found was it looks like the roots had been girdled in a very small container, and the tree had grown quite large. And so they actually put it in a big container, and it never rooted out into that big container. And then as soon as we jostled it around to plant it on our project sites, I shouldn't say I planted it, but the contractors did, it damaged the fragile root systems that existed, and the trees were dying. So the arborist did what's called a tree autopsy and found there really wasn't a root structure in place, which was very deceitful by the nursery, who shall remain nameless. But that is a condition that can happen also. So you should see roots rooted out to the edge of the container, but not circling around or coming out the weep holes. We also want to look just at the leaves as an indicator of tree health. They shouldn't be wilted, they shouldn't have pest or disease damage, like any kind of holes or distortions in it. They shouldn't be turning yellow and falling off unless it's fall and it's a deciduous tree. Then that would be okay. We want to look at the trunk, and we want to make sure that we have one nice solid stem, that there's no broken, major broken branches or cuts or other signs of disease like oozing, weeping type of wounds on the tree. And I have seen nurseries try and deliver infected plant material out to my sites, which I've had to reject. So looking at the leaves and the bark, you can see there's some clear pest damage on the tree on the right. You can see all the holes in it. The tree in the middle, that's a viral problem. That's peach leaf curl. That's kind of unavoidable. You would have to treat that tree probably every dormant season to keep that under control. And the image on the right actually shows wounding of the trunk and infection of the trunk due to the horticultural ties being so tight. So check around any ties that might come with the tree in the nursery. That's a place where a lot of the diseases start, with them being so tight. It's unusual in our region, but in other parts of the country, trees come as balled and burlapped trees. They're not in containers. That balled and burlap soil has to be kept moist or you'll lose the tree. That's one of the reasons we don't see them in our region. We're so arid, they tend to dry out. But here's an example of trees that were harvested and shipped to my site as balled and burlapped. So you can see them in the nursery in Oregon, then newly dug up, and you can see the burlap and the wire, and they're storing them in moist mulch to keep that root ball moist. And there they are kind of at the nursery waiting to be shipped to our site. When researching trees and you're working with a nursery, reputable nurseries have staff who are very talented. So you can share with them some of your project goals, and they usually have really good advice at helping select tree species that might withstand conditions without a lot of pest and disease problems. So when we plant a tree, we're going to remove the nursery stake that comes with the plant to make sure that that trunk isn't going to get wounded by that. And we actually install, this is a double stake system, 2 stakes that go outside the root ball and down into the native soil, and these flexible tubes that allow the trunk to remain upright and gain some width and diameter so it can be self-supporting. We tend to excavate 2 times the width of the root ball and only as deep as the container. And then the backfill, we would amend that backfill with compost, sometimes gypsum, depending on what our soil report says, is what we would amend that backfill mix with it, with the native soil. So different types of tree stakes. Double staking is the most common. Here's those flexible ties. Guy wires is usually 36-inch or larger box trees. And in rare cases, we might use tree staples. Those need to have a pretty established trunk to have that trunk be self-supporting. So I would say they need to have about a 3-inch diameter trunk to really use that effectively. Guy wires can be a trip hazard, so we want to be careful when using them adjacent to walkways. Here's a field-grown palm selection through installation. These are actually Canary Island palms that have been harvested from people's yards, cleaned up, and then sold to our project, and then delivered. You can see 2 palms per semi-truck, so they're very, very heavy, and then craned into place. And so here's a field-grown tree. This process goes from design through installation for a project I worked on, the new Naval Hospital at Camp Pendleton. You can actually see these trees from the freeway, the 5 freeway. If you look down between the center next to the hospital and between the parking structure, you'll see a big row of these. So first step is we needed to design and get our client approval, and our client really wanted us to explore a number of species, so we kind of developed a ranking system and features of each species of tree, and the one that was our favorite and that kept rising to the top over and over again was the California sycamore, which is what was ultimately chosen. Our client was very worried that the height of the trees was going to start blocking solar panels located on the top of the parking structure. So we ended up having to go into SketchUp and model the shadow studies and show them where the shadows were going to fall in summer and fall. So that's what that's about. Then we had to find nursery raised trees for these large specimens. So we did find a couple field-grown stands of sycamores in our region, and we went out and boxed. I think there was 28 on this project. So we chose ones that had an average height of 30 feet a caliper, which is the trunk diameter of 5 inches, and that's what would end up being placed in a 72-inch box size. So here we are selecting trees and tagging them in the grove. Here are some of the tools and the boxes and pieces that they're going to use to box up those trees. And then lots of hard labor and digging to dig around those trees. We did this when it was wintertime and the trees were dormant, so they had primarily lost their leaves. If these were evergreen trees, it would take a lot longer to box these up because we can only dig one side at a time and then let the tree rest for about 3 to 4 weeks and then dig the second side so that we wouldn't put the tree in shock. But because they were dormant, we could dig them out at once. Here they are lifting the trees out of the big hole after they're boxed up. And you can see all the trees that were removed there. And then delivery to the site, again, big specimens, so only a couple of trees per truck. Here they've marked the locations in the central mall. Here they are, here's some of the trees waiting to be installed. In this case, we staged them first and we decided how they were going to be rotated. I wanted them to be very straight and uniform, like a bunch of soldiers lined up. And here they are digging the hole. You can see how much bigger the hole is. It is much bigger than twice as wide as that container, and that is because we use a special type of soil for these trees called structural soil. This whole plaza is not vehicular rated, so once those trees went in, we had no chance to replace them if they did not take. So it was a measure of protection and also a measure of trying to prevent uplifting of the hardscape around the trees that we use this kind of expensive structural soil system. And there you can see this kind of chocolate cocoa puff rocky soil around is actually structural soil around each tree starting to be installed. There they are. They're starting to put the paver grates around it. We've got these little seat blocks down the mall. Here they are paving and placing. There's big open areas, so even though the paving comes right up to the tree, you can walk right around the trees and not fall in a big hole. And there it is, all installed at the very end. So it came out just as we'd hoped.